We also want to welcome all of our United FreshPAC contributors who could join us today. We look forward to a lot of folks have heard a lot about the election over the last, 8 days or so. A lot of analysis has gone on with this election. But this today is really exclusively for our key FreshPAC contributors to talk a little bit about our views on the election, kind of a general overview of the election, dig a deeper into some of the issues we think are going to be important coming up based on how the election outcomes happened last week, and then want to also open it up for questions and discussions with all of you. Before we get started, too, a couple of ways we're going to do this call or this webinar a little different than what you probably used to when we've done. You can ask questions two ways. You can send questions via your chat button if you're on the web. Also, for the last 10 or 15 minutes of the webinar, we're going to open up the lines, so it'll be open to all of you to ask questions at the end of the session as well through open lines. So with that, let's get started. Again, I want to welcome all of you to this. Today I'm going to be joined by Jim Ellis, who is the political analyst for BIPAC. We have been partner with BIPAC for the last 2.5, 3 years now as a strong business organization. Jim has been with BIPAC for the last year, about a year. And we welcome Jim to kind of give us, like I said, a really big overview of kind of how this election, what happened, what are the takeaways from this election, kind of look at some of the maps and where things happened and why they happened in a certain way. Then we're going to be joined by Randy Russell. A lot of you know Randy. He's been our legislative counsel at United for about 11 years. He is the president and CEO of the Russell Group, Randy's going to talk about kind of the impact on the food and ag industry in broad terms related to this election and what it may mean in certain key issues. And then I'm going to come back on and talk a little bit about kind of drill down a little deeper into kind of the produce-specific issues, kind of building on what Randy says on a few issues, but also adding some other things that we want to talk about that really kind of impact our industry in specific ways. Also want to thank our United FreshPAC Advisory Committee. I know a number of you are on the phone today. We want to thank all of you for participating on the call, participating on the FreshPAC Advisory Committee. We hope this is one of a number of things we're going to be kicking off in 2017 for the PAC contributors as we move forward into next year, to kind of give you a different perspective, maybe a deeper perspective than you get traditionally through our normal communications, through our committees and our meetings and other communications we give, but really give our key FreshPAC supporters additional information about how things are going and some insights on the political side of what we're doing. Again, I want to thank all of the FreshPAC Advisory Committee members that could be with us today as well. So to get started, I thought I would spend just a few minutes before I turn it over to Jim and Randy, really to talk about kind of what the profiles of the new members of Congress, what it looks like, quick snapshot of some of the dynamics of this group that's coming into the 115th Congress. So basically, what we have as of today is we have 6 new senators and 52 new House members of the House of Representatives. We're still going to wait on Louisiana. They have a runoff, so there'll be 7 new senators. What we looked at through is kind of out of those senators and House members, how many member companies of United Fresh are in those states and those congressional districts. And when you look here, there's a really extensive amount of folks that we have membership in with these new members of Congress, which again I think relays the point that we mentioned after the election of reaching out to these new members of Congress and new senators to introduce yourself, introduce your company, finding out ways to reach out to them and inviting them and encourage them to learn about your organization and your company. Now, of course, one of those senators is from California, so I would say about 80% of those are California-based, and obviously in the House members, with the changeover in Congressman Farr's office, or Congressman Farr's congressional district, we had a fair amount of those 333 members that were from the Salinas area as well. So, but we are happy with that breadth of folks that are in there, that are from these new Senate and new House districts. A list of the House members is here, Republicans and Democrats. Kind of a quick overview of these. Again, looking at these folks, we want to make sure we're reaching out and having you reach out. We're doing that here as they start putting their staffs together, as they start putting their offices together. We'll be going by their offices when they come back into town to get formally sworn in early January. And again, any ways you can work on this from a district level and from a business level, that would be great as well. Interesting class profile. Basically, there were 27 states that are sending new members of Congress in terms of the House of Representatives. Florida is basically providing the most with 10 new House members, more than 1/3 of the new delegation. As part of the House Ag Committee, there was only one member who lost their seat, Brad Ashford, a Democrat from Nebraska. And interestingly enough, the profile of the new freshman class, half are Democrats, half are Republicans. Also mentioned here a few names that you're familiar with. Liz Cheney, former Vice President Dick Cheney's daughter, is a new House member. Leon Panetta's son is also a member, and then Charlie Crist from Florida, who was a former governor, is also a new member of the House. 21% of the new members are women. And then also when you look at the overall impact, when a lot of folks, and Jim will probably talk a little bit about this, kind of the profile of, the eve of the election, a lot of folks were predicting double-digit gains of Democrats in the House. They ended up getting a net gain of 7 seats in the House, so the margins are smaller, but not nearly what the Democrats, I think, expected going into that final weekend and the final days of the election. Looking at the Senate freshman class, as we mentioned, there's 6 new senators. There will be a new one in December, elected from Louisiana. Again, mix of folks here, mostly Democrats and one new Republican in this area. And again, looking at a profile of these folks, the Senate freshman class, we will have the first Hispanic woman elected, Catherine Cortez Masto, Nevada. Now, when you look at this, 66.6% of the new senators are women. That'll make overall 21 senators will be women, which is a new record in the Senate. 6 states gain new senators. The closest race as of right now, and will continue to be, is the New Hampshire race, where Maggie Hassan, the former 2-term governor, defeated Kelly Ayotte by 748 votes. Senator Duckworth from Illinois, she was the only new Senate member who actually gained a seat in either party. That was Senator Kirk's seat from Illinois. What's that? New Hampshire too. Yeah, New Hampshire too. New Hampshire too. Yes. Yeah. Sorry, New Hampshire as well. And then that's right. So and then finally, Kamala Harris won the Senate, the California seat for retiring Barbara Boxer. That was the 10th straight election that a California has elected Democrat to the Senate. All right, with that quick overview, I'm now going to turn it over to Jim. Jim, take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. And we certainly had an interesting election night, and much different than most people thought it would turn out. And I think it probably goes down as maybe the greatest upset in potentially presidential history, but certainly in the modern era. There's no doubt about that this was an upset. So if you look at where we start with the President Obama's victory in 2012, it shows 332 electoral votes that he received. The blue states are the ones that he won. The red ones were the ones carried by Mitt Romney. And let's see how the map changed there with the Donald Trump victory a week ago. And you see this here, it's almost exactly the opposite as a lot of us were thinking it would turn out. I mean, we were projecting Hillary Clinton around the 306 mark, and instead it's Donald Trump who comes in at 306, assuming Michigan holds for him, and I think it will. All the votes are counted in Michigan. They still haven't called it. He's ahead by 12,000 votes. The reason they haven't called it is, and they're doing the canvasses across the country this week to verify all the votes. Once the votes are verified, which will likely be Friday or Saturday, they will then, there's a recount period where people can request a vote in, or request a recount in Michigan. And under their procedure, they don't finalize the election until that period ends. I really doubt Hillary Clinton is going to spend the money for a recount because it's not going to affect the outcome. But because that race is within a percentage point, Trump leads just by 12,000 votes. I think that will hold up for him, and I think he'll actually carry the state of Michigan, which would end up, again, him going over the 300 votes. Now, to begin the race, we had looked at the most important states on the map to gauge what was going to happen were Florida, Ohio, and North Carolina in that order. And they were important from the standpoint that for a Republican victory, Trump had to carry all three of those states. There really wasn't a way for him to cobble together the 270 electoral votes needed without having all three of these states. And in fact, he carried all three of those. So that just allowed him to move on, but he still needed more. And this was really, these states you see now on the board of these gold states was the minimum way he could have won, which was Florida, Ohio, North Carolina, and then he could carry Nevada, Iowa, and New Hampshire. That would have allowed him to get a tie. So that was the minimum, and he would have won in the House of Representatives. So that was sort of the minimum what he needed to do. Now, in actuality, on the next slide, we see what really happened here. And, in fact, Nevada and New Hampshire, which the Democrats really had a very good night in both of those states, they ended up being irrelevant at the end. Florida, Ohio, North Carolina did come through for Trump, which they had to do for him to win. Iowa went with him, which was important as well. And then I always thought in the presentations I was doing around the country that one of the states that touch a Great Lake in addition to Ohio and Indiana had to go for Trump for him to win. And in either Pennsylvania, Michigan, or Wisconsin. One of those three really needed to go his way for him to get an outright win. And in fact, at the end of the day, all three of them went his way, assuming Michigan holds. But certainly Wisconsin did and Pennsylvania, and that accounts for his victory in the Electoral College. As we know now, Hillary Clinton will win the popular vote, so more people will actually vote for Hillary Clinton, but that's a little bit deceiving from the standpoint of course, the Electoral College is what matters, and that's the way the system is set up. It's set up that way because it protects the small states. And that's why we have the Electoral College. That's why the Founding Fathers did that, so the rural areas would be protected and have a say. If you went with a straight popular vote like the Democrats want to do now, it would be a city, it would all be urban centers. That's all the campaign would matter. The rural areas, the small states would be totally left behind. This way, they absolutely had a very important say in this election. But when you start off the map and the Republican side concedes California, Illinois, New York, and New Jersey, that's where the bulk of these extra votes came from. And Trump himself said that today, which I agreed with him. Had it been a different system, they would have run a different campaign and would have competed in those big states. And that's where she ran up her margin. So I think it really is an absolutely legitimate victory for Trump, and he really did what he needed to do. And it was turning those Great Lakes states in what is now going to be a very high turnout election. I mean, the media was trying to say this was a low turnout. It was less than 2012. It was less than the all-time record of 131 million set in 2008. That now is not going to be the case because what they were missing is all of the votes that come in after the election. And you've got two states, California being one, Washington being the other, where in their mail votes, they allow those votes to be postmarked Election Day. And they were coming in as of Monday. So the votes could have come in. In California, they still have 4 million votes to count. Washington has probably close to 1 million still left to count. Earlier in the week, they were estimating there were 7 million votes still to count, meaning that 10 million votes came in and were counted after November 8th. If we hit the 10 million, it is going to be an all-time record, because I think we'll probably hit about 133 million, and that explains what happened in some of these states like Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin and Florida, where Hillary Clinton was actually exceeding what she needed to do in the cities like the Philadelphia area, like Miami. She was doing better than President Obama did, yet she still lost. And the turnout in the rural areas and the smaller areas of these states was over the top. It was huge. It was way more than expected. Those people that claimed there was a latent vote for Donald Trump appear to be correct. They appear to be correct, because that is exactly what happened and can only explain the results in those Great Lakes states and even in Florida. So the presidential race ends up being a surprise. You never know just by going with polls. It's interesting, too, the pollsters are taking a black eye. I think it's a little bit unfair. First of all, as we went into the final few days, the sampling periods that ended the day before the election, there were 12 polls. 11 of them said Hillary Clinton was going to win, but they were testing popular vote. So, in fact, they were right. Those that said it would be a very close Clinton win nationally were actually correct. But it was in the states where they missed. They missed Florida. They missed Texas. They missed Georgia. These places, Arizona. The places Democrats said that they were going to finally be able to compete in the South. And I've been saying, in North Carolina too, I've been saying throughout the whole year, Republicans underpoll in the South. They almost always do better than they poll. And that's why Texas came in at 10 points, as it always does for the Republican. Georgia, 6 points, as it always does. Florida, if you looked at the polling, it was pretty consistent that Hillary Clinton was up by 2 points, but there's about a 3-point underpoll, which shows a Donald Trump victory of 1, and that's what happened. North Carolina the same way. So the Republican underpoll is something that needs to be addressed and factored into future elections, because that's in fact what happened. Now our next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the U.S. Senate races, which Robert just covered a little bit. This is what the map looked like going into the election. The Republicans' problem is they had to protect too many seats. So of the 34 seats that were being voted upon in this cycle, 24 were Republican that they had to protect. Democrats next time are in even worse position, and while the Republicans probably will be able to hold, even in what could be a bad year for them. In the first midterm, the president's party usually has a tough time, but the Democrats will have to protect 25 seats versus only 8 for the Republicans. And so that's a huge advantage now for the Republicans. And in the next slide, you'll see which ones going into the election were safe, the red for the Republican, the blue for the Democrats. The next one will tell us where it looked like it was trending right before the election. So you had Democrats looking pretty good in Nevada and New Hampshire. They won both of those. The trends looked their way. The Republican states, John McCain in Arizona, Chuck Grassley, Iowa, Rob Portman in Ohio, Marco Rubio in Florida, they all looked to be putting their races away, which they did. And then it looked like the Democrats had the momentum in Illinois. They did win there. The surprise of the night was Senator Ron Johnson holding on in Wisconsin. There was 2 polls throughout the entire year that showed him ahead. The other polls all showed former Senator Russ Feingold ahead by 5 to 12 points throughout the year, and he ends up losing. So big, huge upset there for the Republicans, even though it's strange that the incumbent winning is an upset, but in fact that's what it was. Roy Blunt in Missouri looked like the trends were going towards his challenger, but he held on for a close win. Pennsylvania, again, looked like the Democrats had a good chance to pick that up, but the Trump turnout helped pull Patrick Toomey through and held on to that seat as the incumbent. And then the seats that did look like they were trending more Republican, Indiana, which was an open seat that the Democrats looked like they were going to take for a long time, and North Carolina, which was a tie for a lot of the year. It looked like they were headed towards the Republicans, and in fact did go that way. Louisiana is gold because the runoff there in their system will be December the 10th. The Republican is favored to win, but it's not a sure thing. So where are we now? The actual, as we just pointed out, this is how the map ended up. And we have right now 51 Republican seats, 48 Democratic rather, with one undecided, which is Louisiana, which will be decided on the 10th of December. It does appear that I think at the end of the day, the Republicans likely end up with 52 seats, which is a lot better than most people ever thought. Now, in the House, we sort of covered that as well. This is what it looks like. The Democrats did pick up the delegation majority in 3 states, Nevada, New Hampshire, as I mentioned before, they had good nights there, and New Jersey. Maine is purple because they are a split state, and so they're the only state in the country now that has a split delegation, equal, in their case, 1 Republican and 1 Democrat. The rest of the states, as you see, the blue controlled by the Democrats, the Republicans, the red, which are 30 states for the Republicans. And quick slide here as we close on the governors, which were very interesting from the standpoint that even though the Republicans lost the governorship in North Carolina, it looks like that. It's not final, but it looks like the Democrat will win there. They picked up 3 in Missouri, New Hampshire, so they did get something out of New Hampshire, and of all places, liberal Vermont elected a Republican governor. The remaining states stayed in their columns. I think the bigger story, however, was the state legislatures going even more Republican than they had been before. If the Republicans hold these huge majorities in these key states, there's a chance, as we hit the census back coming in 2020, and we'll redraw the districts, and the Republicans might lock themselves into the majority because of what happened last Tuesday all the way through 2032. That is not out of the question. So it was rather an extraordinary election in very many ways, and I'm sure there'll be far more analysis coming out when we see actual final numbers here in the next 2 weeks. So Robert, I'll yield back to you.
Okay, well thank you, Jim, very much. And now we'd like to turn over to Randy. Randy, you on the line?
I am. Thank you, Robert. And Jim, very much enjoyed your presentation. Thanks. After listening to what Jim just talked about in terms of how far off some of the pollsters are, it makes me happy that I'm a lobbyist and not a pollster. I wanted to talk just at the macro level for a second about some of the issues that are come up and then drill down on some of the ag and food-related issues. And then I know Robert's going to finish up by talking about specifically some produce-related industry issues. Let me just start at the macro level. So there's about 5 or 6 that I think the Trump-Pence administration, when they get into office on January 20th, are going to focus on. First is Supreme Court. There is a vacancy. I think Merrick Garland was kind of sat on the sidelines and never got confirmed after he was nominated, and you're going to see the Trump administration move pretty quickly to nominate someone to fill that spot, which is the Scalia spot. Interesting that Ruth Bader Ginsburg will be 83 when Inauguration Day occurs, and at some point she may step down. So at a minimum, I think the Trump administration is looking at anywhere from 1 to 3 Supreme Court nominations during their 4-year period, which will allow them to kind of set the course for the next 25 or 30 years. On health care, clearly very high priority, and very early on they are going to move to repeal the Obamacare. The real question is you repeal, but what do you replace it with? And that is going to take Congress some time. It's clear that President Trump is going to keep the pre-existing condition coverage, and it sounds like he's going to keep the coverage up to those 26 years old that stay on their parents' policy. So it's going to be interesting to watch how they handle all that, but that is going to be a high priority to repeal Obamacare. Interestingly, too, with the election, surprising election of President Trump, tax reform is now very much front and center. It's a very high priority for him and his administration, and it'll be both corporate tax reform and individual tax reform. And on the corporate side, I think they're going to try to follow fairly close to what Speaker Ryan has talked about, which is lowering the corporate rate to somewhere in the neighborhood of 20%. And they're also focused on repatriation of foreign earnings and trying to bring that back into the U.S. As well. In terms of infrastructure, I think that is something candidate Trump talked a lot about. He talked about a $500 billion, half a $1 trillion infrastructure program focused on roads, bridges, ports, and the like. Some of that will be new government funding. Some of it will be in the form of tax credits, trying to get the private sector to do more enforcement. But I think that is something that could be done early on that has bipartisan support. And then finally, clearly the Trump campaign made a very big issue about regulations. And I want to talk in a second about some specifically related to ag, but I think overall you're going to see them take a very, very hard look at several regulations, things like the overtime rules, several in the area of energy, both on oil and gas, and several other areas that they're going to take a very, very close look at. Some have suggested that this is going to be the first 3 or 4 months they are going to be moving to try to repeal several regulations, and we'll watch that very closely for you. In terms of key agriculture and food issues, probably number one is the Farm Bill. And as was just talked about by Jim, if you look at the numbers in non-metropolitan areas, just to put it in perspective, when Barack Obama ran for president in 2008, he carried 41% of the non-metropolitan vote. Hillary Clinton only carried 26% of the non-metropolitan vote. There was a huge voter turnout in rural areas and smaller cities that went decidedly 3-1 for the Trump-Pence ticket, and I think that's probably going to bode well for the agriculture arena in terms of I don't think they're going to forget that as they move forward. So one area is clearly going to be the Farm Bill, which is up in 2018. It's a big issue for the produce industry, building on the successes of previous farm bills with a specialty crop title. So we're going to put a lot of effort into that. A challenge that we have is obviously, particularly in the House of Representatives, is ensuring that we get 218 votes to pass that. So we're going to have to build a good rural-urban coalition. And I think that plays very, very well into the produce industry and the specialty crop industry's wheelhouse, given our focus on conservation and nutrition and the like, and where we have the ability to bring Democrats along with Republicans to the table to vote for the bill. So I think that creates a great opportunity. And we shouldn't forget that when you look at the House of Representatives, of the 435 members, there are only 34 congressional districts that are primarily rural in nature, meaning they have 50% or more rural votes. So to get to 218, it absolutely requires you to get suburban and urban members to vote for the bill, which means that in the end, I believe the SNAP program, formerly known as food stamps, will remain in the bill. Whether it does that initially or not, it's hard to tell, but I think it will be in the final bill. In terms of key regulations that the Trump-Pence administration will be looking at, I would say the waters of the U.S. isn't on the endangered species list. I think you can go to the bank. It will be, as it relates to ag, rewritten and made much more favorable to ag. That has been a subject of a lot of criticism in the ag community and the rural community, and I think that is at the top of the list in terms of something they're going to go after. I think there's also an opportunity here on the Food Safety Modernization Act to, I'm not suggesting overhaul it, and I'm not suggesting that at all, but I do think that there's some opportunities to go in and tweak the rules in order to make sure that there are sufficient compliance times, sufficient time before enforcement occurs, and maybe even look at some of the definitions that have included. I know we've had some issues in the produce industry dealing with packing sheds and the like, and I think it's exactly those kinds of things that we'll now have an opportunity with a Republican House, a Republican Senate, and a Trump administration to modify some of those provisions to bring a little bit more balance to it. Finally, I would just say two other issues, and I know Robert will talk about this a little bit more. First of all is immigration. Obviously, in this campaign, candidate Trump made a very, very big issue about building the wall. Whether that wall is an actual wall or a part wall, part fence, part drone coverage, I think that you will see him move on that. But I also think there's an opportunity here for our industry where an effective guest worker program is so critical to potentially down the road link an effective guest worker program that makes sure we do have a sufficient labor, could be linked to a Trump effort to put more border security and enforcement, and link the two together to get sufficient votes to pass it. So that's something we're going to have to watch very closely and work very, very hard on, but I do think there's an opportunity there. Finally, on trade, again, another issue that took front and center during the campaign, and clearly in the areas such as Pennsylvania that Jim talked about, in Michigan, in Ohio, in Wisconsin, and Indiana, where Trump did so well, trade, particularly from the manufacturing-based perspective, was a big issue. Trump actually carried somewhere in the neighborhood of 43% of union households, which is pretty amazing when you think about it. And a lot of that was because of what he talked about on trade. I don't think you're going to see the Trump administration be anti-trade. I think what you're going to see is them take a very hard look at trade agreements and making sure that they're balanced. And I think you're also going to see a very, very strong effort on enforcement to ensure that existing trade deals, such as NAFTA, have been followed. And if they haven't, I think you'll see them file trade cases against countries that they feel are not following the rules, and we may even see more countervailing duty and anti-dumping cases as we go forward. So, Robert, that's a quick overview, and I'll turn it over to you to finish it up.
Great. Thank you, Randy. So let me, kind of build again off of Jim and Randy's comments, and I want to dig a little deeper into some of the issues that we see in produce. Some of this is, Randy's covered a little bit, but I want to kind of go a little further into this. And when we look at these issues, we look at kind of the big four issues, and I term that in a good way, because these are issues that in my time and the time I'm sure a lot of you have been part of United, we spent a lot of time, and that's immigration, nutrition, food safety, farm and ag policy. When looking at the first two issues here on the slide, immigration reform, Randy mentioned the discussion and the promises by President-elect Trump to kind of address immigration in his first 100 to 200 days. We look at that as any debate on immigration is a good start. You guys are well aware, who are on this phone, just getting Congress to talk about this issue, try to have some type of debate since the fall of the comprehensive effort by the Senate several years ago, is a welcomed opportunity for us. I will say that this needs to be, when this debate occurs and how it occurs, it's going to be driven by a lot of you and other folks around our industry. It's not going to be driven by an inside the Beltway, D.C.-based discussion. We are going to have to, again, make the case of why agriculture needs to be connected with any type of immigration debate that's going on, and in Congress and with this administration. And that's, to Randy's point, could be in a lot of different faces, a lot of different kind of aspects. It can range from rehashing the old comprehensive versus piecemeal approach. It can be a combination of smaller successes in terms of enforcement, kind of connecting enforcement with new and improved and more efficient guest worker programs. It could be an ag-only type push. That's still kind of up in the air at this point in time. But we welcome a debate on immigration reform because we think we have spent a lot of time over the last many years of explaining to Congress, explaining to the public of why we need a new immigration reform program and immigration programs for the produce industry and the ag industry in general. Also, part of that is regulatory reform on immigration. Currently, as you know, a lot of folks are getting more into H-2A and H-2B programs. To Randy's point and kind of the point of this new administration and new Congress, providing some recommendations on regulatory reform that can happen, very quickly, would also be in our best interest in things we're looking at this point in time. Switching to nutrition, it's safe to say that we have made under the Obama administration incredible progress in our nutrition policies and our nutrition platform which includes increasing access to fruits and vegetables in federal nutrition programs. And that ranges from school lunch to school breakfast, food stamps, WIC, you name it. We have made incredible progress because of the leadership of the First Lady and this administration on these areas that we think are important in providing more nutritious food to the consumers, to recipients of federal nutrition programs, folks like that. That being said, we can, I think, pretty clearly state that this new administration is probably not going to have nearly as much focus as we've had over the last 8 years. And we've got to, again, similar to immigration, make a case of why, some of the successes that we have moved forward cannot be rolled back. We need to make the case of why it's important that we have the fresh fruit and vegetable program and why it's important to have an extra additional half cup of fruits and vegetable servings in school lunch and school breakfast. These are the things we're going to have to work with this new administration as they start filling their cabinet and sub-cabinet positions of kind of them understanding what is at stake related to this and the long-term best interests of our industry and the people we want to serve fresh fruits and vegetables to. That will require a new strategy, a new kind of thought process, new stakeholders that we're going to have to engage with that we have not necessarily engaged with. In some cases, we might be fighting with over the last 8 years. But so that's kind of we're looking at a much broader strategy, a newer approach to the nutrition debate and how we can link up better, given the dynamics of what happened in the election last week. Switching to food safety, Randy mentioned Food Safety Modernization Act. Again, we are not saying we want to roll back. We want to continue to see good implementation of the Food Safety Modernization Act. But for the standpoint of where we can see and find things that potentially make sense to improve the efficiency of the regulations and how they work together. I mean, again, most of you understand that are on this call. We certainly understand the challenges or the opportunities, I guess, there related to how these rules work together for the produce industry. We're in a unique position to have to explain that, and we're seeing some of that already kind of play out related to food facilities versus the produce rule and how they interact with each other and what they mean related to definitions of farms and facilities. So where can we find some ways to enhance and improve the regulatory process that helps can continue to increase the food safety and having a safe, affordable food supply, but also create some efficiencies within the business community that helps us not overstep or overreach in the requirements that have little to do with food safety, but are more a regulatory burden. And then I think there's going to be some situations at that point as well where there may not be able to make changes in the regulations. So what are some things that we want to consider potentially down the road or in this next few years under this administration and under this new Congress that potentially can improve the law, how we can improve the law that again, can make the regulatory process and continue to improve food safety the way we think it should be. Under the Farm Bill, again, Randy talked about the Farm Bill. I will kind of highlight, or at least, echo what he said. We think a lot of the issues related to the Farm Bill are going to relate to policy, not the budget should be our focus on this. We've got to prove also, when you look at the programs and investments, we've now gone through two farm bills where we have had programs in place, key programs in place, that are helping our industry, but now we've got to start articulating that and what's the return on investment related to these programs. What is the kind of the success stories we can talk about with Congress and this administration related to the Farm Bill and such. Again, similar to what I said on nutrition, this will probably involve new coalitions. It will probably involve different stakeholders. When you think of the rural vote and what happened in this election, there's be a lot of attention to that area as well. Finally, before we get to questions, I wanted to talk about a few other issues. Randy mentioned trade and the impact of like the Trans-Pacific Partnership and things like that. One of the other areas that President-elect Trump has talked about, he talked about on the campaign trail, was renegotiating NAFTA. Randy put the word modernizing NAFTA. And I think we've got to all take a serious look at that and what the impact is going to be to the trade and through the movement of produce throughout the North America and through the NAFTA countries. Our industry has put a significant amount of investment in that space related to consumer demand for our products, and that has been investments in all three countries. So, we certainly don't want to see a retrenchment of trade. We want to see good trade policies. We want to see enforcement of trade requirements, but we certainly don't want to get in the middle of a trade debate related to NAFTA and places such as that will impact or impede trade through the three countries and impact consumers in our industry. Infrastructure investment, how can we play a role in this issue? Again, looking at our transportation system and produce, looking at roads and bridges, ports, border and access points. That whole area will be up for debate, and one of the things we're looking at as well related to if this is one of the first issues out of the chute that we think has a really good shot of being passed on a bipartisan basis. How do we play a role? How do we improve the efficiencies of moving produce throughout this country, whether it's on the roads or in the ports or through border access? Finally, regulatory reform. What I would say there is, Randy mentioned some of the key programs, the Waters of the U.S., the Worker Protection Safeties, what's happening in EPA with our crop protection tools and how they're analyzing, reevaluating or reassessing the use of crop protection tools. All of this is under the regulatory reform umbrella. The term that we heard over the last month or so of the campaign and into the final weeks or so was, President-elect Trump wanting to drain the swamp. And a lot of people thought that was a metaphor for a lot of different things. How we look at that metaphor is how we can reassess our regulatory structure at the federal level that can help our country, help in terms of our industry, help them succeed as well. So we look forward to having that dialogue with the new administration on what things we think regulatorily are going to make a big difference in the success of our members at this time. So with that, I'm going to stop. We're going to open for questions and discussions, and I think Angela, if you can open up the lines, we can kind of do that. I don't see
the conference has been unmuted.
Harris Marcus on 501.
Okay. So folks, the lines are unmuted, so hopefully you can hear us, and we'll start out with any questions from the audience. And identify yourself if you don't mind. I know there's not a lot of shy people out there. Well, I'll start with the first question then. Jim and Randy, talk about the rural dynamic here in terms of the votes, in terms of the election, both on a presidential level, but also in a, in the congressional level. What does that do in terms of changing the dynamics of how this administration looks at how to set their agenda for the next, at least the next couple of years in particular? Some people would say Trump really, based on his campaign, really is not really beholden to any type of constituent, kind of profile or constituency. That he's going to be there to work and make deals with whoever can help him push his agenda, and that could be a wide range of folks in Washington and outside of Washington as well. So, Jim, you want to start out?
Well, I think that's a really good question, and before the election, we never would have expected that Republicans would end up in control of the White House, the Senate, and the House. But in fact, that's what we have. And it is to a very large degree, and I think the members know this, and the Trump administration knows this, to the rural communities. Because if the Clinton administration, Clinton campaign rather, made some big mistakes in this, and one of them, maybe the biggest the way it turns out, was underestimating the vote in the non-urban areas because, as I've said before, she exceeded her goals in most of the urban areas, particularly in Philadelphia and in Miami and these key states, and still loses. And therefore, it was a bad underestimation of what the rural vote was like, what it could do, how big it was, and I think Trump tied into that. He certainly understands that he is the beneficiary of that, and I think rural concerns will rate very highly among the incoming president and the continuation of the House and Senate majority that the Republicans have. Randy?
Yeah, I totally agree with Jim. You know, the Reince Priebus is going to be the chief of staff, and we've got Steve Bannon that is going to be the chief strategist, and Bannon's job is to, I assume, walk into the Oval Office about 3 times a day and remind Trump that he said he was going to drain the swamp. And I say that a little facetiously, but the point being his job is to go in there, I think, every day to remind the president, when you get involved in all these incremental decisions day by day, remember who brought you to office. And I cannot think, and Robert, you said this earlier, I cannot think of a president in modern times that's been less beholden to any particular interest than Donald Trump. I mean, he's not beholden to the Republican Party because a lot of them abandoned him, certainly through the primary process and even in the general election. I think what's going to play out here, though, in the Congress is you've got a lot of members in the United States Senate on the Democratic side that are up in 2018. And, of course, in Washington, we finished one election, and a day later we're already focused on the next one. Yeah. And in 2018, there are 25 Democrats, including 2 independents that caucus with them, that are up for re-election, and only 8 Republicans. And when you start tracking where those members are, which are, by the way, 7 out of the 9 Democrats on the Senate Ag Committee are up for re-election, including Ranking Member Stabenow. Several of these members are in states that not only Trump won, but also has, as Jim said, Republican governors and Republican state legislatures. So you've got people like Bill Nelson in Florida, Heidi Heitkamp in North Dakota, Debbie Stabenow in Michigan. You have Claire McCaskill in Missouri. You have Joe Donnelly in Indiana. These are all states that have Republican governors and have Republican legislatures that Trump won. And then you have other states that Trump won, like Pennsylvania, where Casey is running for re-election. You have, West Virginia, which voted for Trump, where Manchin's up for re-election. So, again, I think the rural vote, and they're all keen to this in a non-presidential election year where turnout is lower. I think the rural vote is going to be there and is watching people, and I think that's going to lead a lot of these Democrats that are up for re-election to try to play ball, at least initially, with some of the Republicans, because, as you know, in the Senate, it takes 60 votes to do anything.
Questions from the group?
Robert, Bob Meek at Utah Onion, how are you?
Good, Bob. How are you?
Quick question. It seemed like as we, would go to Washington in the last couple of years that it was almost a futile exercise because there was nothing that could have happened. Do we feel that today is a little more positive, or January 20th will bring a little more ability for us to get a listening ear and then have them be able to do something other than just say there's absolutely nothing we can do because we're at a stalemate? And one last question, and sometimes, ag, as you stated, there's some things that Obama did and the First Lady did for nutrition and different things that actually was good for agriculture. And do we have optimism that good things will continue to happen, or are there fears that we may be trumped out?
Well, I'm happy. I'm happy to take that on initially.
Go ahead.
Let's start with the nutrition piece. I mean, I'm going to be honest. I don't visualize a Trump administration, and I may be wrong. I doubt they're going to have a garden in the White House. I don't think you're going to have a celebrity chef involved with White House policy. I don't think you're going to have a food policy council in a Trump administration. I I don't want to speak for the First Lady, but I don't think the First Lady's initiative is probably going to be nutrition. So I think that's just a fact of life. I think that, again, I think, some of that, a lot of that nutrition stuff was very helpful on produce. Overall, there were a lot of people, however, in the ag community that were not happy with the government taking action in some of those areas. So I think that I think there's going to be a divergence here from the nutrition food focus of this administration. I think there's going to be a stark contrast with what's likely to come down in a Trump-Pence administration. I think there'll be a stark contrast on that. I'm not saying that they aren't going to be positive towards produce, but I don't think they're going to try to use the government lever nearly to the degree that the current administration did.
Thank you.
How about the other part about it, Randy? Do you want to comment about that related to kind of the frustration of not getting things done?
Well, look, the onus right now is on Republicans. The Republicans control the White House, they control the Senate, and they control the House. And as Jim said, that was not an outcome that very, very many people thought was going to happen. So they now have the reins to the trifecta. They have a responsibility to move forward and to address the issues that they think people care about. So I think there's going to be a lot of energy. There's a lot of focus. Every time there's a new administration, a lot of action occurs the first 6 months to 12 months. We saw that in the Obama administration, the first term. We're going to see that in the Trump-Pence administration. So yes, I do. I think there's going to be, some campaign promises versus reality of governing that are going to have to be dealt with. But, for the Republicans to think they woke up on Wednesday morning and controlled the White House, kept the Senate, and only lost 7 seats in the House, to say they're joyful is an understatement.
Other questions from the group? So I'll do another question while you guys are thinking of any more you might have before we close this out. A lot of talk about Vice President-elect Pence and his role. He's just taken over the transition team. He's a product of the House of Representatives. I mean, if you look at this the last 8 years, we've had a very Senate-centric type of administration with former Senator Obama, former Senator Biden, and a lot of the negotiations and deals that ever happened related to some of the things they got accomplished really ran through the Senate. Is there a thought that this may be more of a House-centric type? Pence's relationship with Ryan, the chief of staff, has his ties with Speaker Ryan. Some would say this might be a change in how negotiations happen on Capitol Hill, that the House is going to play a much more effective or different role than they probably have in the past. Jim, you want to start with that?
Well, I think there's a good possibility of that, and I think yesterday with the leadership elections, the Republicans unanimously nominated Paul Ryan as Speaker and pretty much did not challenge the leadership. So maybe that's a new era of greater cooperation there. And now it's the Democrats with some problems, with Nancy Pelosi maybe having to go to an election here on November 30th to retain her position, which I think she will. But things are, that one day changed everything. And 10 days ago we would not be talking this way, and now it's a totally new outlook, and it's going to be very, very interesting. But I agree. I think the House will certainly play a bigger role as we move forward. Probably a little bit more cohesive and hopefully a more united House. Randy?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's going to be a much more balanced approach, and they'll probably move more in sync. Mitch McConnell, who is the majority leader and will remain the majority leader, is as skilled as they get at working the system, parliamentary-wise. So he is going to play an absolutely critical role in this. And I think Speaker Ryan's challenge going forward will probably be, given that they have about a 23-vote margin, is how do you deal with the Freedom Caucus, which is, as you guys know, are the conservative Republicans that oftentimes vote no on a lot of things. And there's enough of them that you can't lose too many of those and keep all the rest of the Republicans and pass bills. So a real challenge for Speaker Ryan going forward. And I know he accepts this as Speaker, and it's a much better circumstance than it was prior to last Tuesday. But it's how do you manage the Freedom Caucus when there's 40 of them and you only have a 23-seat margin.
Time for one last question from the group. Anybody else got a question before we close down? Well, before we leave, I want to again, if you guys have your webinar web still up, I wanted to highlight a few key things that are going to be coming up for our FreshPAC participants. Obviously, we've got the new Congress coming in at the beginning of January, the inauguration. That'll be done on January 20th. Also, we'll be presenting a FreshPAC report in January that will go over kind of the analysis from the last election, some of the stuff that we've done. You've seen it, maybe a snapshot of that as well. In February, we're going to be doing a Political Insiders Congressional Dinner and Briefing. It's going to be in conjunction with our Government Relations Council meeting. And then we have several webinars also included throughout the year that you can sign up for. So, again, we want to thank all of you for being on the call and on the webinar. We hope you found this useful. This is being recorded, so if you would like to hear this again, we're happy to share this with you. And, again, have a great day. Thank you very much.